Chapter 075 Soul Stealer. The great wilderness that existed in the north of Altasia was a place that contained many rare and valuable things. Exotic natural resources, interesting locations, magical plants and animals extinct in the south. All of those and more could be located if one was willing to spend time searching for them and was strong enough to survive deep in the untamed mountains and forests. This wasn't because the northern wilderness was particularly blessed in natural resources and magical hot spots, of course, but simply because most of it had never been settled and systematically exploited by human societies. The southern areas had once had these kinds of things as well, but the spread of civilization and rising number of mages had caused many of them to disappear. Mines were depleted, forests chopped down and turned into farmlands, dungeon openings sealed away or turned into carefully regulated mana wells, delicate areas destroyed through war or short-term greed, and dangerous plants and animals deliberately hunted to extinction. After all, nobody wanted to live next to a man-eating magical tiger or a walking tree that periodically planted itself in your field and ruined the crops, no matter how valuable they were to some mage in the neighboring country. Such was the case with the plant that Zack and Zorian were currently after. The Soul Sizer Chrysanthemum, as it was called, was one of the rare entities that ate souls. Since nobody wanted a soul-eating flower growing in their garden, or anywhere near them, really, the plant rapidly went extinct any time humans moved into an area. Thus, if Zack and Zorian wanted to find one, they had to go to the wild areas untouched by most of humanity. Currently, the two of them were hiding under a globe of invisibility, warily watching a huge black bear amble past them. Though the bear wasn't truly a life-threatening danger to them, they were in no mood to pick a fight with it. It was a resilient monster, and no part of its body was particularly valuable on the general market. Considering they had been trudging through the dense foliage of the great northern forest for most of the day, they really just wanted to find where the Soul Sizer Chrysanthemum was hiding and go home. Thankfully, the bear did not appear to be hunting and paid little attention to its surroundings. It simply walked past them and soon disappeared from sight. Zack dispelled the globe of invisibility that hid them from sight and then cautiously scanned the area for further dangers. Although not as dangerous as the deeper layers of the dungeon and the like, Altasia's northern forests were not a place for the unwary. This deep in the wilderness, there lurked threats that posed a danger even to Zack and Zorian working together, should they be caught by surprise. Gathering all these ingredients on Silver Lake's list is surprisingly hard, Zack said, relaxing slightly upon detecting nothing of note. They are rare, dangerous, or both, and Silver Lake never gave us a single clue where we could find any of them. And yet, the task is still clearly doable, so we can't really complain about being given a completely impossible task. The old witch really has a knack for this stuff. I'm half convinced that most of these are not necessary for the potion at all, Zorian said, sighing lightly. He spent a few seconds reorienting himself and then set off in the northwestern direction. Zack followed him without complaint. She probably added quite a few of these because she personally needs them for something, not because the potion we ordered demands it. The trouble is, we have no idea which ingredients are essential and which are not, Zack finished for him. She never lets us see the actual recipe. We can only speculate and try to call her bluff, but we're more pressed for time than she is and she knows it. She wouldn't relent, even if we guessed correctly, and might even up the price out of spite. Yes, Zorian nodded. Whatever. It's doable, that's all that matters. Let her have her little victory if it pleases her. True, Zack agreed. Say, are you really sure we're in the right place? We've been looking for more than 2 hours and the flower doesn't appear to be here. Maybe the Yeti tribe we spoke to lied to us. Relations between them and humans are not exactly the best. The tribe's shaman didn't lie, Zorian said, shaking his head. He thinks we're cocky idiots that will get our souls eaten by the Soul Sizer Chrysanthemum, so he told us the truth as he saw it. He gets the payment we promised him and 2 humans end up dead. It's a win-win as far as he was concerned. It's just that Yetis don't really have any concept of maps or precise coordinates, so all I have is a set of vague directions regarding the local landmarks. Just be a little patient. But this is so boring, Zack whined childishly. Tough luck, Zorian told him pitilessly. Zack was quiet for a few seconds before he started talking again. You know, the idea of fighting a flower is kind of funny. And embarrassing, he said. I don't know, Zorian said. I think fighting those rabbits a few days back was way more embarrassing. Especially since both of us ended up getting bitten before we managed to bring them down. Ugh. Don't remind me, Zack groused. Those have got to be one of those fake ingredients Silver Lake added to the list. I mean, how are a bunch of rabbits like that related to a potion of soul perception? I think those red gems embedded in their foreheads were some kind of sensors, Zorian speculated. They did see through our every attempt to sneak up on them. The two of them spent the next half an hour discussing which of the ingredients were likely to be fake, only to realize that none of them were obvious imposters. They could all potentially be valid, which meant that either Zorian was too paranoid or Silver Lake was very clever when picking her additions. Zorian was leaning towards the second option. I know we already talked about this before visiting Silver Lake, but are you really sure this is even necessary? Zack eventually asked. Seeing Zorian's confused look, he moved to clarify. Acquiring soul sight, I mean. Are you really sure you need it? Of course I'm not sure, Zorian said, shaking his head. Maybe once we get the whole key, everything will be neatly resolved, and me getting soul sight will end up being a pointless diversion. The thing is, even if the Guardian of the Threshold overlooks the fact there are two of us and places our souls back into our bodies, there is a problem. Your original body still has its old soul, Zack said. Well, it would be more accurate to say that the body I hope to inhabit was never truly mine to begin with, Zorian said. But yes, that's the core issue. If I want out, I need to steal my real-world body somehow. I guess this could be done by convincing the Guardian to switch my soul with that of the original, but the Guardian has made it clear that this goes against the very nature of his job. I'm skeptical that acquiring the key will let us ignore this. I get that, Zack said. But maybe you don't have to literally steal the body, you know? Maybe you can kind of, you know, coexist with your old self? An interesting idea, Zorian said. I don't know enough about soul magic to say if that would be possible, but that kind of thing would still require me to acquire soul perception first. Yeah, I guess, Zack sighed. They walked through the forest in silence for a few seconds, Zorian keeping an eye out for that funny-shaped rock outcropping that the old Yeti had told him about. It should be around here. What's really on your mind? Zorian eventually asked. You know I'm not really sure that I'm the real controller of this time loop, Zack said. And if I'm not, I could be facing the same choice you are. Ah, Zorian said, nodding. Personally, he felt Zack's fears were unfounded, but he knew by now it was useless to tell him that. I see. Do you think I should try to acquire soul perception too? Zack asked. I'm not nearly as comfortable as you are in killing my old self, but I have to admit, if I have to choose between myself and him, it would be the safe thing to do, Zorian told him. Concerns about not being the true controller aside, he didn't see any particular downsides about Zack acquiring soul perception. But best not to try that in this particular restart. We have no idea how the safety triggers on your marker are going to react to a potion like that. I mean, they did terminate the restart when you tried to undergo Atlantic's training, remember? I remember, Zack scowled. If it weren't for that, I would have hit simulacrums of my own by now. Right. They could easily trigger this time too, since the potion works on similar principles, Zorian remarked. It's best if we wait for a less interesting restart before testing this. Yeah, I'm in no hurry, Zack said. He glanced around the area they were traveling in. How long do you think it will take you to find this soul-eating flower? Maybe we should stop for now and come back tomorrow. Actually, Zorian began, his eyes zeroing in on a bunch of seemingly unremarkable trees. We're here. He pointed at the base of one of the trees, where a beautiful white flower proudly sprouted from the forest floor. There was nothing overtly supernatural or sinister about the soul-sizer chrysanthemum. It was a large plant, but not monstrously huge. Its leaves and stalk were the most mundane of green, easily blending into the rest of the nearby vegetation. A single white flower the size of Zorian's head crowned the otherwise unremarkable plant, its numerous rows of petals folded inwards into a sort of flowery hemisphere. This sort of peaceful, unremarkable appearance was merely a trap, though. Since the soul-sizer chrysanthemum was immobile, most of the time it behaved as inconspicuously as possible to lure its victims near. The moment Zack or Zorian stepped close enough, the flower would reveal its true nature. You know how I said earlier that the idea of fighting a flower is kind of funny? Zack asked. Yeah. Zorian prompted. I take it back, Zack said. There is nothing funny about a dangerous creature that hides itself so thoroughly. I looked straight at it and I still can't see any sign of danger. If we hadn't been clued in advance about its true nature and where exactly it can be found, we'd never have noticed it. Zorian hummed in agreement. If you really think about it, this is one of the most dangerous enemies we could possibly face. Stuff like the Grey Hunter could kill us, but the time loop makes that just an inconvenience. But this flower. If we stumbled upon it by accident, without being mentally ready or applying some kind of soul ward beforehand, there is a good chance we'd really end up with our souls devoured by it. Well, you would, Zack pointed out cheekily. The safeguards on my marker would probably kick in the moment my soul was torn away from my body. You, on the other hand, would be thoroughly doomed. You know what soul-devouring entities do, right? They flay the outer layers of the soul for nourishment and keep the indestructible core as a sort of Montauk battery, Zorian said. In the case of wraiths, they use the core to make more of their kind. I don't know how fast this process is, but even if it takes a while, I'd probably end up with my soul severely damaged by the time the restart ended. I would probably spend every single restart thereafter in a deep coma and stay that way until the time loop collapsed. They both stared at the seemingly peaceful flower for about a minute, both of them lost in their own thoughts. All right, enough dawdling, Zack suddenly said, clapping his hands loudly to wake up Zorian from his reverie. Let's get this thing uprooted and chopped up into ingredients. After discussing it for a few minutes, they decided it would be best if only one of them confronted the chrysanthemum. The other would stay back and be ready to extract them if something went wrong. This, however, led to the issue of who would be staying back and who should advance upon the dangerous plan. The argument was surprisingly charged, with both of them arguing that they should be the ones attacking. Zorian argued that his soul defenses were better than Zack's by far and that they couldn't afford to get into the habit of triggering premature restarts. Zack, on the other hand, argued this was dumb and that he should definitely be the one making the attempt. Zorian might have much better soul defenses, but if they proved to be insufficient, he could wind up permanently dead in all future restarts. In light of that sort of risk, who cares about a single interrupted restart? This is beyond stupid, Zack told him. You don't even like fighting. But I fight when I have to, Zorian countered. Besides, I think you're exaggerating the level of danger I would be in. If you see me slump dead, immediately kill yourself. That will trigger a restart and get my soul out of its stomach. I doubt the chrysanthemum can mutilate my soul in such a short time. Zack scowled at him. Any plan that involves me committing suicide is a bad plan. I swear, I still can't believe you were wearing a bomb around your neck before getting control of your restart trigger. Actually, I still carry a bomb around my neck, Zorian told him, showing Zack the plain-looking golden chain he usually kept tucked into his shirt. His spell formula skills had advanced to such an extent by now that the chain was no longer obviously a magic item, unless one specifically decided to inspect it with analytic spells. It would look just like a mundane accessory. Having more contingencies is always useful, after all. Still, I guess you have a point. I don't think I'd fail here, but the worst scenario is worrying. Tell you what, I will agree to back off here, but if you fail and end up cutting the restart short, I get to confront the chrysanthemum the next time around. Deal? Deal, Zack nodded. If I can't do it now, I probably won't be able to do it on the second or third attempts either. I guess it is kind of unreasonable of me to cut restart after restart short like that. I still feel an urge to hit myself when I think of all the restarts I frittered away by doing just that. Then Zack started walking towards the flower, and all their arguments were revealed to have been moot. The Soul Sizer chrysanthemum twisted itself to face them both, the flower stopped moving with a speed and fluidity alien to normal plants, and a barely perceptible ripple emanated from it, covering a spherical area easily large enough to cover them both. They had been within its striking range all along. It just chose not to attack them immediately. Fast and omnidirectional, the ethereal ripple released by the chrysanthemum was impossible to dodge. Zorian, caught off guard by the attack, could do nothing except take it head-on. Zack, having expected some kind of response from the flower, had successfully erected a shield around himself before it. It didn't matter, though, the ripple passed through the shield like it wasn't there at all. It slammed into both of them at almost the same time, sending them reeling. Zorian felt sick in a way he had never experienced before in his life. His vision swam, assailed by numberless fleeting illusions and flashing lights, and his ears felt like a bomb had gone off right next to him. His sense of balance went completely haywire, his skin stung all over and his stomach churned like something was trying to tear itself out of him. It took a monumental act of will not to vomit all over himself and collapse on the ground. It was some kind of stun attack, Zorian realized. An incredibly complex stun attack, weaving together physical, mental and spiritual aspects into one unified whole. Zorian reached into his own mind and forcibly shattered the mental aspect of the stun. The whole structure of the attack immediately became unbalanced, allowing Zorian to stabilize his condition somewhat. His vision cleared up a bit, and he saw Zack collapse to his knees, hands shaking, and vomit all over the forest floor. That wasn't much of a surprise, to be honest. Zack was not as adept as Zorian in defending either his mind or his soul, and he was closer to the chrysanthemum when it attacked. Before Zorian could do anything, the Soul Sizer chrysanthemum turned towards him. Perhaps because he had weathered its stun effect better than Zack, or because he was closer to the border of its attack radius and it worried he would flee, but the flower chose to deal with him first. Its multitude of petals erupted with ghostly blue flame and unfolded like a mouthful of teeth, revealing a pitch-black area in the middle of the flower. Zorian's soul immediately started vibrating in his body, sending waves of pain throughout his very being. Normally, this level of soul attack would never be able to seriously threaten Zorian. But with the after-effect of the stun still lingering, resisting the pull of the flower was proving difficult. And the effect wasn't stopping. Instead, the suction only seemed to get stronger as time went by and the flower searched for a firmer grip on his soul. Despite that, Zorian was not worried. Before it attacked, the flower felt just like any other plant in the forest. It had no discernible mind, and thus nothing that Zorian could target with his mind magic. Now, however, he could very much feel a thinking mind behind the chrysanthemum. He gathered all of his concentration and then launched a massive telepathic attack at the plant's mind. This time, it was the flower's turn to reel back in shock. Its attack on Zorian's soul immediately ceased as it silently shook and waved around, trying to stabilize itself. Zorian wasn't going to let it have the time. Even though he still hadn't entirely recovered from the initial attack, he poured all of his energies into launching one mental attack after another. The flower resisted fiercely. It was clearly a complete amateur when it came to mental combat, but it possessed an instinctive ability to form mental barriers and was armed with a powerful magic resistance that made it difficult and mighty expensive for Zorian to target it. After a while, Zack recovered enough to make his own move. He summoned a massive ghostly blade and sent it chopping down at the stem of the plant. In all honesty, it looked like complete overkill and Zorian worried he was going to ruin the chrysanthemum's value as an alchemical component. They needed it fairly attacked, after all. The flower was undaunted, though. Threatened by the incoming blade, it spat a stream of glittering stars out of the black hole in the center of the flower. The glittering motes of light immediately arranged themselves into a dome-like construct that stopped the blade cold with barely a flicker. They were soul cores of creatures the chrysanthemum had devoured in the past, Zorian realized. Somehow, it could control them and shape them into defensive constructs. Well, not just defensive constructs, it turned out. After Zack and Zorian kept hammering its defenses for a while, it realized that at the rate things were going, it was going to lose. Its shield was going to get battered down sooner or later, and Zorian's strategically launched mental attacks were disrupting its attempts to launch further soul attacks at them. Upon realizing this, the chrysanthemum reshaped the soul cores into a series of long, hair-like whips and started flailing them around. Zorian at first thought the chrysanthemum intended to attack them with those, but it turned out he had once again underestimated the plan. It quickly wrapped the whips around the nearby branches and uprooted itself right out of the ground before turning to flee. Zorian had to admit, seeing an uprooted flower swing about from branch to branch, like some kind of weird monkey, was a unique experience. Sadly for the soul-sizer chrysanthemum, such desperate measures would not save it. It launched another stunning pulse at them in an attempt to lose them, and this did slow them down quite a bit, but in the end it was chased down and killed. "We have been outsmarted and nearly killed by a flower," Zack said, still keeping a wary distance from the chrysanthemum's remains. "We are never speaking about this again." Zorian readily agreed to this request. Break, the esoteric order of the Celestial Dragon, known to most people as the Cult of the World Dragon, was more than just a weird religion. It was an entire support organization that helped its members advance forward in life. They vouched for their fellow members when skills and trustworthiness were questioned. They helped them get the jobs and mentorships they needed to advance in their careers, offered their members loans under favorable conditions, granted free access to spell libraries that would be too restricted or expensive for members to otherwise get, and they provided legal aid if members got into trouble with the Mage Guild. The higher ranking one had in the cult, the more pronounced these advantages got. This was the main reason why the cult got so powerful and widespread. The sort of large-scale, highly treasonous plot that the cult was currently participating in was not really something that they usually did. It was actually very, very atypical. For the vast majority of their existence, they had simply been a mystery cult crossed with a mutual aid society, kind of shady and disreputable, but nothing that the authorities would go too crazy over. Their biggest enemy was the Triumvirate Church and their faithful, which considered the cult's beliefs to be a direct affront to their dogma. In any case, an expansive organization like that had more than just direct members of their secret club to draw upon. They also had a multitude of outside associates and other experts that sporadically worked with them. Some of these were true faithful that deliberately maintained distance from the main organization so that outsiders could not easily puzzle out the connections between them. Others were just mercenaries that sporadically took missions from the cult, and some simply didn't know who exactly they were working with. Zorian had largely ignored these people during his investigation into the cult's activities, since tracking them all down was an incredibly time-consuming and difficult task. He had better things to do with his time. Then Alanik interrogated Sadamir a bunch of times, and they discovered that the crazy mayor of Nyazovdveri had detailed knowledge of these people. Sadamir appeared to have gone out of his way to gather as much information about the cult as possible, worried that they might move against him at some point. The relations between him and cult leadership hadn't been the best since they realized he intended to publicly advocate for the legalization of necromancy, something they regarded as lunacy. Zorian still wasn't terribly interested in spending time to investigate all these people. He didn't think that would result in anything substantial. But Alanik was, and he didn't have too many other things vying for his time. Thus, he wholeheartedly threw himself into the investigation, making full use of the time loop to comb through every lead and scrap of evidence Zorian could wrench from Sadamir's mind. And today, that effort seemed to have borne some kind of fruit. Alanik had notified Zack and Zorian that he had uncovered something important and told them to meet him next to an unassuming house in one of Sioria's richer neighborhoods. When they arrived, they found the place cordoned off by the Mage Guild personnel, but they had been notified that the two of them were coming and let them through on Alanik's orders. Once again Zorian wondered just what position Alanik occupied that he could command people like this, but Alanik stubbornly refused to answer such questions, and Zorian respected the man's help too much to go prying into his thoughts. "You called, we came," Zack said, waving his hand at Alanik to get his attention. "What do you have for us?" I don't claim to understand every detail of the situation you have found yourselves in, Alanik said, choosing his words carefully due to the presence of other people in the room, but I believe you've indicated the name Varesboranova is important to you, yes? Zorian looked at him in shock. What? What does Vares have to do with this? Is he here? Zack asked. In a matter of speaking, Alanik said evenly. He motioned them to follow him and led them down the stairs and into the basement beneath the house. This is the house of one of the lawyers deeply associated with the cult of the World Dragon. He is not a member, but he has helped on a number of occasions and is known to be sympathetic to their organization. I managed to get authorization to conduct a search of his house and, well, this is what I found when I opened the icebox in his basement. Alanik stopped next to one of the 3 iceboxes lined up next to the basement wall and unceremoniously lifted the lid up. Inside was a frozen body of a teenage male, a peaceful expression on his frosted face. It was unmistakably Varesboranova. Zack and Zorian stared at the body for nearly half a minute, not saying anything. He's dead? Zack asked lamely. Indeed, Alanik said. I hear neither of you really got along with him well, so I will not offer you condolences. So the owner of this house? Zorian began uncertainly. Jornik Dokakin, Alanik told him. Yes, this Jornik. Did he kill Vares? Zorian asked. When did this happen? He is adamant that he did not kill the boy, Alanik said. He claims the boy died of unknown causes while sleeping. One day he was fine, if a little surly, and the next day Jornik went into his room to check up on him and found him dead in his bed. I'd normally scoff at that explanation, but the timing. He died on the first day of the restart, didn't he? Zack guessed. Yes, Alanik nodded. The frost damage and the sheer passage of time make it difficult to tell for certain, but I'm pretty sure this is the same situation like those Eredia beneath Seoria and the mercenaries that were found mysteriously dead in their homes. Doesn't that mean Vares was Salkeld? Zack frowned. He isn't Red Robe. We can't say that just from this, Zorian said, shaking his head. We have no idea how exactly he entered the time loop, or what would happen if he left it. For all we know, this could be the natural result of his leaving the time loop. Ugh, Zack grumbled. So we found Vares and yet learned nothing of value. I hate things like this. Well, anyway. I guess Vares being frozen in the basement of the heavily warded house does explain why we never managed to find him when we searched for him in the previous restarts. What was he doing here, anyway? Jornik has been disinclined to cooperate with us in this regard, Alanik told them. He refuses to discuss details with me. He is a lawyer, so he is harder to shake up and interrogate than most people I deal with. That's why I told you to come here immediately. If you want to get anything out of him, we need to talk to him now. I'm afraid House Boranova has already heard of the news and is going to descend here sooner or later. Alanik then led them to the second floor of the house, where Jornik was currently under house arrest with a couple of guards posted next to him. When they arrived, they found Jornik pacing around his room like a caged tiger, angry and agitated. He deliberately ignored their entrance, not giving them so much as a glance. Zorian observed the man and the room itself. Jornik was younger than he thought he would be, probably in his mid-20s and with a very handsome, boyish face. He was immaculately dressed in expensive but conservative clothes, and the room he was in seemed to be designed to maximize his image as a cultured, well-read intellectual. The walls were lined with filled-out bookshelves and small works of art laid scattered around the place to give it a bit of artistic flair. Zorian's parents had a similar room back in Suren. Much like them, Jornik had probably never even read most of the books lining the bookshelves. So, Mr. Dokakin, Alanik began. I'm back. Don't mind my 2 helpers here, they are just here as support. Now that you've had a chance to calm down a little, are you willing to discuss things like a civilized person? Zorian gave Alanik a mildly questioning glance. Was he deliberately pissing the guy off? Jornik did not look calm at all. Alanik did not react to his silent question though, so Zorian simply trusted him to know what he was doing. He supposed that with him here, it hardly mattered whether Jornik wanted to talk or not. Jornik finally deigned to look at them, giving Zack and Zorian a brief, contemptuous glance before dismissing them as unimportant. "Your church really likes them young, doesn't it, priest?" Jornik said, grimacing at Alanik unhappily. "I know my rights, Mr. Zosk. I will not talk to anyone until my guild representatives and my lawyer arrive. Until then, I will patiently wait here, and I'd appreciate it if you stopped wasting my time." "Curious that a lawyer would want someone else to defend them," Alanik said. "A surgeon would be foolish to try to operate on himself, and a lawyer is ill-advised to represent himself in court," Jornik said dismissively. "I would not expect a church dog to understand these things. People like you always think you're above the law, anyway." Alanik hummed, completely unaffected by Jornik's caustic comments. "I'll be honest and say I expected as much." "Zorian?" Zorian did not ask Alanik what he wanted. He already knew. He reached out mentally towards Jornik. The young lawyer actually had rudimentary mental defenses, but this was not something that could stop Zorian. He punched through those defenses as if they were paper and pressed down on the man's mind. Jornik's eyes widened like saucers as he realized what was happening. "Answer the questions," Zorian commanded. "And no." Jornik protested. This is illegal. I'll. Damn it. Did you kill theirs?" Zorian asked, just to be sure. "I didn't kill him. I didn't kill anyone. I already said I just found him dead one day. It's the truth." "What was he doing in your home?" Zorian asked. We were friends," Jornik said, gritting his teeth. "A friendship between a 15-year-old boy and a 25-year-old man like you?" Alanik commented lightly. "Who is it that likes them young, again?" "You people." Jornik hissed angrily at him. He took a deep breath and forcibly calmed himself down. "Look. I promise to tell you the whole story. Just release me from your mental compulsion. It's hard to think with this thing muddying my thoughts." Zorian gave Alanik a questioning glance. Alanik nodded for him to do as Jornik said, apparently willing to give the man a chance. Fair enough. He supposed they could always repeat the procedure if Jornik became uncooperative later on. "I'm still keeping an eye on your surface thoughts," Zorian told him as he released the compulsion to make him talk. "So don't try to lie to us." "I don't have to lie." Jornik snapped at him. "This whole thing is just. Damn it, theirs. Even when dead, he still makes trouble for me." "Yeah, he has that effect on people," Zack said with a sagely nod. Jornik ignored that comment, gathering his thoughts for a moment. "All right," Jornik said. "So, I met Vayers almost a year ago when he came to talk to me about his legal options in regards to his situation in his house. I empathized with him then. What happened to him reminded me a little of myself. I too have had my birthright stolen from me." "Really?" Zack asked curiously. "I don't want to talk about it, and I ask you to be merciful and not force me," Jornik said. "It has nothing to do with this, and you can find out most of it through public documents. It's not like I've ever hid my grievances, after all." "Just give us the short version," Alanik said. Jornik gave him a hateful look, but after glancing at Zorian for a second he decided to humor the scarred battle priest anyway. "In short, I was a relative of a small house that went extinct some time ago. Although not a true member of the house, I was the closest thing to a descendant, and I was supposed to inherit their wealth and properties. But then a new claimant suddenly appeared, completely out of nowhere, claiming even closer relations. His proof of his lineage was painfully fake and all the documents obvious forgeries, but he was better connected than me, and in the end, courts assigned everything to him and left me with nothing." "I see," Alanik said. "And so you saw a young Vayers coming to you for help and felt touched by this young man that was seeing his legacy usurped from him by branch members of his house." "Yes, precisely," Jornik said. "In truth, I couldn't help him much. Formal houses like his own are given a lot of leeway in how they govern themselves internally, and general law is only somewhat applicable to his situation. Still, the boy seemed to appreciate my advice, and the fact that I cared. Which not many people around him did, if he was to be believed. And him coming to live inside your home? Zorian prompted. That. You know he was expelled from his school? Jornik said, frowning. Well, he didn't want to go back to his family after that. After wandering all over the city to cool down, he came over to my house and begged me to house him for a few days. He said he needed a place to hide for a while and think about what to do about things. How could I refuse? That's very generous of you, and I mean that sincerely, Zorian said. But how does that lead to his body being stuffed into your icebox? That. I didn't know what to do, okay? Jornik said, becoming agitated. I just came into his guest room one morning to see why he missed breakfast and found him dead. I didn't know what to do. Despite all his problems, he was still a noble and House WebNovel would never take this lying down. He died in my home and the wards didn't register any intruder at all. How would I possibly explain this? I empathize with the boy, but I don't want to ruin my life for him. Haven't I suffered enough? Jornik gritted his teeth and started pulling at his hair in frustration. With a sharp turn, he started pacing around the room again, gesticulating to himself and muttering under his breath. It wasn't an act, as far as Zorian could tell. Jornik had never bothered to reform his mental barriers after Zorian destroyed them, leaving his thoughts completely unguarded. Everything he said was truth as he saw it, and he was honestly panicking and unsure what to do. So, this could be a dumb question, but why keep Vair's body in the icebox in your basement? Zack asked suddenly. I didn't know what else to do, Jornik said, still pacing around the room. If I took it out of the house to dump somewhere, the trackers hired by House WebNovel would find me the moment I stepped out of my house's privacy wards. As for destroying it, well, I've never destroyed a body before. I mean, obviously I didn't. How would I know how to do that? So I put the body on ice while trying to think up a solution. They didn't find out much from Jornik after that. Although Zorian personally found the man's choices to be rather questionable, he was ultimately just a man who found a dead teenager in his guest room and panicked. If Jornik hadn't knowingly helped the cult of the World Dragon so many times in the past, Zorian would have even felt sorry for the man. About 15 minutes after Zack and Zorian left Jornik's room, another group of Mage Guild personnel arrived, accompanied by several representatives from Noble House WebNovel, and took over the scene. Alanik informed Zack and Zorian that this marked the end of his involvement with the case, and thus the end of their ability to examine the house or question the man. It was just as well, though. The restart was coming to a close, so there was not much time for a detailed examination. Additionally, it would have been better if they arrived in the man's house at the start of the restart, before he had a chance to stuff Vair's body in an icebox. And in the next restart, they would do just that. Until then, Zack and Zorian agreed to keep speculation about what this meant about Red Robe to a minimum. Break. Despite numerous issues that had cropped up in their search, in the end Zack and Zorian managed to gather all the ingredients Silver Lake needed, or at least claimed she needed, for a soul perception potion. It took them most of the remaining time to do so, however, and by then the end of the restart was looming close. Thus, they were somewhat anxious as they waited for Silver Lake to finish making the potion. It should work, Silver Lake told them. I mean, I've never actually made that specific potion in my life, and the old witch recipe that describes it is not nearly as clear and precise as the modern recipes you two are familiar with. But since it's me making the attempt, it will probably work out fine. Yes, we get it, you're awesome, Zack said with a tired nod. And don't you forget it, Silver Lake said shamelessly. It shouldn't take long. Gathering the ingredients is the time-consuming part. The actual potion making could be done in as little as 2 hours. You two go play outside while I work. You can practice your pocket dimension creation skills or something. You have a real gift for finding exceptionally infuriating teachers, Zorian, Zack told him after they got out of Silver Lake's earshot. Yes, but they tend to be exceptionally capable ones, too, Zorian countered. He took out a small box from his jacket pocket and flipped it upside down, allowing a stream of marbles to pour out of the box and into his waiting palm. A moderately perceptive person would quickly realize that there was no way all these marbles could fit into such a small box. Only 28 marbles? Zack smirked. Amateur. I managed to cram 32 of them inside a box like that. Zorian gave Zack a suspicious look, but it didn't seem like his fellow time traveler was lying about that. Damn it, Zorian grumbled. All those specialized shaping exercises, and I still can't advance faster in this field than you do. I have 6 times more mana than you do, and you're further hampered by the number of simulacrums you keep around you at all times, Zack said with a careless shrug. It's hard to make up for such a disadvantage. He was right, of course. Truthfully, it was amazing he was able to keep up with Zack's learning rate at all. It still made him feel a little annoyed that he lost their informal competition about who would advance faster in the field of pocket dimension creation. Oh well, there was still time to catch up. They would be chipping away at the topic for quite a few restarts after this, and he was confident he had more patience than Zack did. It ended up taking Silver Lake nearly 4 hours to finish the potion, despite her claim that it could be done in as little as 2 hours. She claimed she had merely been waiting for the concoction to cool down to a comfortable drinking temperature before bringing it over, but Zorian suspected it had more to do with the process being harder than she had thought it would be rather than anything considerate like that. You should drink the potion soon, Silver Lake told him. The instructions were a little fuzzy about its shelf life, and there was a bit of unplanned excitement involved in making it, so I had to add in a little something to forcibly stabilize it. It should retain its potency for about a week, after which there is a small but non-trivial chance it might explode in your face. Best not to take that chance, Unplanned excitement, you say, Zack deadpanned. That doesn't exactly inspire confidence. I'm 97.3% sure it will work as expected, Silver Lake said firmly. There was a small silence as Silver Lake looked at them expectantly, no doubt hoping one of them would ask her why it was 97.3 instead of 99 or something like that. She would be sorely disappointed. They both knew better than to humor her like that. I'm 97.3% sure you pulled that number out of your ass, Zorian told her bluntly. But it doesn't matter. This month is approaching its end and time will soon reset itself. I'm going to drink this right away. Ah yes, the great time reset, Silver Lake said. You're still going on about that, huh? Well, did I ever tell you about— But Zorian wasn't listening anymore. He uncapped the potion bottle Silver Lake handed to him and immediately drank the entire potion. The thick green liquid was bitter as hell, but otherwise unremarkable. For a few seconds, nothing happened. And then he experienced a sensation reminiscent of the soul-stealing move he had experienced when fighting the Soul-Sizer Chrysanthemum, and his senses rapidly began to dim. He lost consciousness. Break. When Zorian woke up, he found out 2 days had gone by. They had expected as much, though. According to what they knew, the process of gaining soul perception through this method always took at least a day, and could take as many as 5. Some unfortunate souls, ignorant of this little detail, had been known to die of dehydration after drinking a potion like this in secret. In regards to what had happened while he was unconscious, Zorian had only the fuzziest of recollections. He had periodically regained awareness throughout the process, but it was like trying to remember a dream. He remembered a series of senseless, disjointed images, a sea of suns connected by glowing threads, a massive volcano in the middle of an eruption, a carpet of smoke crawling across desolate lands. Just like his usual dreams, in other words. He put it out of his mind, and focused on the important stuff. Like whether he had successfully acquired soul sight or not. The answer was that he had. It wasn't as instinctive as Zorian's mind magic, but Zorian had found a sufficient amount of instructions inside Amir's mind to figure out what he had to do. So long as he poured mana into his soul in very specific ways, he could see the souls of other people. It wasn't really sight as such, so much as a whole new sense that gave him headaches when he tried to process what it was really telling him, but that would improve with time and practice. Overall, Zorian considered the whole thing to be a massive success. The only problem with the whole thing was that he had forgotten to mention to Imaya and Kirill that he would be absent from home for several days, So Zack had to take the brunt of their ire and convince them not to report his disappearance to the police. Now all three were kind of annoyed with him. Currently, Zorian was sort of hiding from them in Silver Lake's pocket dimension. Of course, he did have a valid reason for being there. Beside that, he was trying to find something that would convince her future self that the time loop is real. Silver Lake did have a penchant for telling him little personal stories from time to time, but it was hard to discern which ones were fake and which ones real, so he doubted that would help him convince her in the future. "Did you know I was considered a dangerous radical in my youth?" Silver Lake asked him. Zorian didn't and told her so. "Oh yes. When I was born, the Covens had already been on their last legs. Ecosian magic had shown itself to be mostly superior to our own spellcasting traditions. After all, most of our spells are long rituals involving lots of chanting and standing still for hours on end, or relied upon invoking the spirits of the land, who are notoriously fickle things if you ask me. You can never rely on them to aid you when you need them the most. The one thing we had going for us, our potion making, the Ecosians simply copied and then improved upon. I saw all this, and I decided to commit a huge heresy. I decided to study Ecosian methods in addition to the traditional education I received from my mother. My coven exiled me for it when they found out." "Tragic," Zorian said. "But that wasn't quite what I was looking for. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't really be surprised if I revealed I knew this little tidbit of your past." "No, of course not," Silver Lake said. "I'm sure you could find out that and more if you really decided to investigate my history. If you came to me and started narrating my past, I'd just think you did your homework before coming to see me." "Right," Zorian nodded. "So I'd really prefer if you gave me something more substantial. Surely you have some kind of private password that you could easily tell me without truly inconveniencing yourself. You can change it immediately after you tell me, so it's not like there is any danger I'll abuse it." "Not during this month, no," Silver Lake scoffed. "But what if you're right? I have no assurance you'll only use such a secret to convince my future self of your crazy tale. You could use it just as easily to rob her blind." "But you don't believe in the time loop," Zorian tried. "If I'm going to entertain a stupid hypothetical, I'm not going to do a half-assed job," Silver Lake said, her tone brooking no argument. "But, I think I have it. Do you remember how you came in front of my home and made all that racket to draw my attention?" "Of course," Zorian nodded. "It's one of the best moments of this month." Silver Lake took a sudden swipe at him with her bony, withered hand, but Zorian successfully dodged her strike. "Brat. I should refuse to say anything now, but I don't want you pestering me about this further," Silver Lake grumbled. "Anyway, at some point I actually considered the possibility of someone finding my abode and trying to catch my attention. I was thinking of what would be the proper, polite way of doing that, and I realized I would probably have to install some kind of doorbell or something. And that would be kind of incompatible with the whole hidden nature of this place, no?" "Right," Zorian agreed. "So the doorbell would have to be hidden too, accessible only to people who have been told about it in advance." "Exactly," Silver Lake said. "Now, in the end, I just scrapped the whole idea. I didn't want people visiting the place too casually. However, I did implement part of the system before I gave up. There is a stone in this place that emits shrill whistles when a special keystone is activated right outside the entrance to this dimension. These keystones were never actually made, so the whistle stone just sits there, uselessly gathering dust. I guess there is no harm in showing you how to create a matching keystone. And that would convince you there's something funny going on?" Zorian asked. "Well yes, I guess it would," Silver Lake said. "I mean, I never actually made a single keystone, let alone distributed them to people. How could you possibly create one that matches perfectly with the whistle stone in my dimension? If you showed up holding one of those, that would catch my attention for sure." Zorian grinned. He had a feeling their chances of convincing Silver Lake in the future had just dramatically improved. Break. One of the more unexpected things about this restart was that Damon had made a surprise decision to stay in Seoria for the last few days of the restart. Zorian was not sure what exactly triggered this decision. Perhaps it was because Zorian had asked to borrow his divine artifice mirror for a little research, or because his eldest brother had joined them in exploring the ruined palace inside the orb this time, but he suddenly decided he absolutely must see the invasion that occurs on the night of the summer festival. Zorian thought nothing of it at first. Even when Damon came to see Oria a few days before the actual day of the invasion, making a mysterious claim that he had something he needed to do, Zorian just dismissed it as him wanting to talk with his old friends or whatever. Then Damon came to him for help, and Zorian realized he probably should have inquired deeper into what Damon was doing while back home in Eldamar. "No, Damon," Zorian told him firmly. "I am not going to set up a meeting between you and Fertof." "Come on, Zorian, this is our family at stake here," Damon pleaded. "Oh, please," Zorian protested. "You and Fertof not getting along with each other is not a crisis. That's par for the course in our family. Stop being so melodramatic. Crisis or no, this TimeLoop is perfect for solving things like this, and it will take so little effort, too. Show some compassion for your big brother and do me a favor, eh?" Damon insisted. "Haven't I let you borrow my mirror when you asked, despite my better judgment? And let's not forget about that secret room full of treasure that I found in the ruined palace. It would have taken you months to find it without me, if you ever did." Zorian made a sour face. Yes, Damon was rather more helpful in this restart than he usually was. That secret room in particular. They were still sorting through the contents, but it would seem there were some very nice things hidden there. One of the daggers appeared to be a genuine divine artifact. They had no idea what it did yet, but even if it turned out to be underwhelming, it would be extremely valuable as a research subject and priceless trade good. "Look," Zorian said. "Using me as a lure so you can basically ambush Fertof out there in the open really doesn't sit well with me. Don't you think that's kind of a jerk thing to do? I thought you hated Fertof." Damon challenged, raising his eyebrow at him. "I don't like him, but this sort of manipulative maneuver doesn't sit well with me," Zorian said. "Just go confront him directly, okay? I'm sure he'll relent if you keep pestering him." "No, he won't," Damon said slowly. "Do you think I'd suggest this if it worked? Besides, you're looking at this the wrong way. You don't have to trick him or anything. You said he always seeks you out at the end of the restart, so long as you don't avoid him. Something about the cure for the purple creeper rash, yes?" "Yes," Zorian reluctantly admitted. "So you want me to just go somewhere where he can easily reach and wait for him to show up on his own?" "Yes," Damon nodded. "Since you haven't asked him to meet with you, he has no right to complain when it turns out I was in the vicinity." "Well, all right," Zorian sighed. "Though if you have been pestering him these past few days, he might decide to deviate from his usual pattern. It's amazing as it is that he always ends up pushing Hibari into that purple creeper patch. That has got to be a deliberate move on his part." Damon agreed. "I should ask about that too, I guess." The final plan was very simple. Zorian would spend the evening walking around the city, occasionally casting divinations to see if Fertof was approaching. If he was, he would quickly seek shelter in one of the many coffee shops scattered around Sioria, under the theory that Fertof was slightly less likely to start yelling at Damon in the middle of a crowded coffee shop than in the middle of the street or whatever. Once Fertof sat down, Damon would show up to crash the event. Damon's little plot worked perfectly. Fertof did show up, looking for Zorian's help in procuring an anti-rash potion. Zorian had already made the necessary salve before coming here, so he just handed the little jar full of salve to Fertof and sat back to finish the cup of tea he ordered. Fertof looked down at the cure jar in his hand, fingering it awkwardly, and frowned at him. "You just happen to have that very specific cure lying around in your pocket?" Fertof asked Zorian incredulously. "What the hell, Zorian? Do you carry a whole apothecary with you at all times or something?" Well, the way his pocket dimension creation skills were advancing, that might actually be a possibility in the future. "I knew you'd be looking for that," Zorian said. "I spoke to Hibari, after all." Fertof's face twisted in surprise. "She spoke to you? he asked, shocked. "Oh man. Why me? Look, thank you for this, but you pushed her into that purple creeper patch deliberately, didn't you?" Zorian said, not really asking so much as making an observation. "It's not that simple, okay?" Furtov said defensively. "You don't know what she's like. I know she looks quiet and all, but she was being really aggressive and wouldn't take no for an answer, and she kept trying to kiss me, and I guess I went a little overboard." "And a purple creeper patch just happened to be nearby?" Zorian asked. Furtov's explanation was great and all, but how did that explain Ibri ending up in that bush every single time? "I deliberately took the purple creeper-related task when they were distributing class assignments, because people usually avoid them like a plague. But that didn't deter her this time. I guess in retrospect it would have been smarter to take something where lots of other people would be nearby. At least that would stop her from trying to get physical with me." Zorian was going to inquire more about this, but this was the moment that Damon finally showed up to crash the meeting. Strange. He actually kind of wished Damon had taken longer to arrive. The story was just getting interesting. "You again?" Furtov hissed, giving Damon an angry glare. "Why can't you take the hint? And how the hell are you even here? I thought you were supposed to be in Koth." "Please, I just wanted to talk, okay? Why are you being so?" Zorian leaned back in his chair, taking another sip of his tea, and mentally toned down the volume of the shouting going around him. So much for the idea that Furtov would hold back because they were in a public location. But it didn't matter because this was Damon's stage now and there was no need for him to get involved. Well, there wasn't any need for it until both of them decided to pull him into their argument just because he was there. And because his smug attitude pissed them off, apparently. Sometimes he just couldn't win. Chapter 076 Critical Blunder. The evening was a pleasant one, with cool winds blowing through the streets of Seoria and the moon shining brightly in the sky. Zorian took it all in, feeling somewhat invigorated by the evening chill, and thought about life. It was interesting, Zorian mused, that even after all these years spent in the time loop, some simple experiences had eluded him until now. Getting thrown out of a coffee shop for disturbing the other customers, for instance, was an entirely novel experience. He glanced to the side, where Damon and Furtov were currently having a tense face-off, staring at each other with serious expressions. He wasn't even angry, in all honesty. Yes, being ejected out of the building was mildly embarrassing, but it didn't bother him all that much. What did bother him was that even after causing such a commotion, they still failed to even establish what the problem was. Honestly, these two. Furtov, look. Zorian began cautiously, I understand you being mad at Damon, but you're only shooting yourself in the foot here. The reason Damon sought you out is because he wants to know why you're angry with him. If you want to get rid of him, just tell him what your problem with him is and he'll go away. Well, probably. Don't you start, Furtov said, giving him a suspicious frown. You helped him set this up, didn't you? I didn't ask you to seek me out, Zorian pointed out calmly. You decided that on your own. And nobody forced you to stay around and argue with Damon, either. You already have the salve you came for, no? You could have just picked yourself up and left the moment Damon showed up. That's what I'd have done in your place. The fact that you stayed around means you do want Damon to know why you're angry after all. For a second, Furtov just stared at him, a stony expression on his face. It was a somewhat alien look on the normally amiable Furtov. I so want to punch you in the face right now, you smug asshole, Furtov eventually said. But I suppose there is something to that logic, so I'll restrain myself. Finally, Damon mumbled, just loud enough for both of them to hear him. All this dancing around and refusing to say what's bothering you, I almost thought you had turned into a woman while I wasn't looking. Furtov glared furiously at him, to which Damon reacted only by rolling his eyes. Thankfully, the shouting didn't start up again. It seemed that Furtov had gotten his anger out of his system a bit. Right, now, Just before the nice waitress asked us to leave the premises, I believe you were saying something about your problems with the academy being Damon's fault? Zorian prompted. It was in his best interest to help Damon get his answer now, or else the man would no doubt make more annoying plots like this one in upcoming restarts. Which is ridiculous, Damon butted in. We barely even interacted with each other by the time Furtov started attending the academy in Syria. Yes. Furtov said, pointing his index finger at Damon with a stabbing motion. Then he repeated the gesture for emphasis. Yes, that's exactly my problem. We barely interacted at all. What? Damon asked uncomprehendingly. You don't even know what I'm talking about, Furtov said, more as a statement of fact than a question. I think that's what pisses me off the most about this. You don't even remember. You've completely forgotten all about your promise. Oh, what promise? Damon fumbled. You were supposed to help me. Furtov burst out, pointing at Damon again and then hitting himself in the chest with a closed fist to indicate himself. Remember? I came to you before enrolling here and asked you if I could count on you to support me when I run into troubles at the academy, and you said yes. You said I could always come to you for help if I needed it and that it's no issue at all. Damon visibly winced at those words. Oh, he said weakly. That. Yes, that, Furtov said sullenly. I was such a fool to actually trust you on that. What good is a promise like that when you're always busy with something, always unreachable and brushing me off when you're not? You probably forgot about that promise the moment you made it. If you ever took it seriously at all. I made that promise in good faith, Damon protested. It's just that I had some professional opportunities come up afterwards that were too good to let go. Don't you think it's kind of unreasonable of you to expect me to sabotage my career just to help her with schoolwork? I mean, you could have always just asked Zorian for help instead and... Both Furtov and Zorian gave him a glare for that. Damon considered his words for a moment and then mumbled something that was either a quick prayer to the gods or a colorful curse before dropping the idea and moving on. Anyway, moving on, Damon said, coughing into his fist. I guess I kind of did fail you there. I do admit that. However, to say that makes me responsible for your academy problems, that's still rubbish. Let's be honest here, Furtov. Me helping you out every once in a while wouldn't have made much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. It wasn't supposed to be every once in a while, you jerk. Furtov protested. Zorian stood off to the side, shaking his head as the two continued to argue. As minutes ticked by, it became obvious that this promise thing meant completely different things to Furtov than it did to Damon. Furtov, it turned out, had understood Damon's promise as a commitment to a much heavier form of support. Though Furtov did not phrase things that way, Zorian understood his middle brother's explanations for what they were, an admission that he expected to be carried along throughout his entire education on Damon's coattails. Damon, on the other hand, probably made that promise without much thought put into it, thinking it a mere formality. He evidently expected that Furtov would come seek him out once every few months to ask a question or two and talk about girls and life and stuff. Amusingly enough, he ended up not even getting that in the end. Can't you see you're being completely unreasonable? Damon said, gesticulating wildly. Do you even hear what you're saying? You basically expected me to do half of your work for you. That's completely ridiculous. He's right, it is, added Zorian, nodding sagely. I was just describing an ideal case. I would have been happy with even a fraction of it, Furtov shot back. And it doesn't matter because in the end I got nothing at all. You gave me a promise and then you forgot you'd ever made it. That's a jerk thing to do, no matter how you try to spin it. He's right, it is, added Zorian, nodding sagely. Shut up, Zorian. They both said in perfect synchronization. Zorian pretended to stagger back from the outburst and mimicked clamping his mouth shut. As for Damon and Furtov, the two of them shared an uncertain look between each other before quietly deciding to calm down a little and take a step back. Zorian would have liked to claim that this was his plan all along, but truthfully he was just messing with them for his own amusement. But seriously, you're being kind of crazy here, Damon said to Furtov again, a little more sedately this time. I get that you're having problems with your studies, but, man, you just don't understand, Vertov complained, cutting him off. This city, this academy. It's out of my league. I know this. I've always known this. I know my limits. I'm not as smart as you and Zorian. You're plenty smart, Vertov, Zorian cut in. You're just lazy. Vertov didn't even try to refute him, but Damon gave him a sidelong glance. I thought you were going to keep quiet. Damon asked. I lied, Zorian said with a careless shrug. Whatever, Vertov said, exhaling heavily. I'm not as good as you two. Happy now? Zorian made a circular motion with his hand, signaling him to keep going. Anyway, my point was that I only agreed to enroll here because Damon said he would support me. If I had known I would have to do this alone, I would have told Mother and Father to enroll me somewhere else. Somewhere less prestigious. But they pushed hard for this, saying what an opportunity this is, and I thought, well, at least I'll have my genius older brother there to help me sort things out. Zorian didn't say anything after that, quietly waiting by the side and letting the two of them talk. He didn't feel much compassion for Vertov's plight. Damon may have a cause for feeling a little guilty about how things turned out, but all Zorian saw was the same old Vertov he'd known from his childhood, a lazy, shallow asshole constantly looking for ways to shift his own responsibilities onto people around him. He was darkly amused when the two of them eventually decided to just take a step back and have another meeting in a week or so. Something that would never happen, and Damon damn well knew so. Oh well, it wasn't really Zorian's problem. That is, until Vertov left the scene and Damon tried to make it his problem. No, Damon, I am not going to delve into the hows and whys of Vertov's failures and assemble a tutoring program for him, Zorian bluntly told him. Why not? You do for Kirill and even that female friend of yours, Damon said. He's your brother, Zorian. Sorry, but you can't guilt-trip me into doing this. Mother's antics have made me completely immune to guilt trips, Zorian said dispassionately. I am sick and tired of having to pick up after Vertov's failures time and time again. How about you do it for once in your life? You're the one who made a promise that you failed to keep, no? Don't you think it's in poor taste to try fobbing this off on me so quickly after your little heart-to-heart with Vertov? The restart is just about to end. When else am I going to talk to you about this if not now? Damon protested. And I don't retain memories over the restarts like you do, that's why I can't do it. But you can leave yourself notes at the end of each restart and work on the problem that way, Zorian countered. You were doing that very thing in order to figure out how to get Mother and Father to accept your marriage to Arisa, so I don't see why you can't apply it here too. Damon frowned, either because he did not like the idea or because he was reminded of how utterly he had failed in his task of convincing them thus far. He's your brother, Damon, Zorian said, flinging his words back at him. Ugh, Damon grumbled. You can be such a little shit sometimes. Fine, you win. I guess it has to be me. But I'll need you to do me a small favor. Break. One restart ended and a new one began. At the start of the new restart, Zack and Zorian immediately invaded Jarnik's home, knocking him out, kidnapping him and searching his home. They found Veyers dead in the guest room, just like Jarnik's story in the previous restart suggested they would. Using his brand new soul perception and a couple of soul magic forensic spells he had stolen from Sadamir's mind, unsurprisingly, necromancers had a very developed tradition of analytic spells meant to be used on corpses. Zorian determined that Veyers was in a virtually identical situation as the soul-killed Aradia beneath Syria. Normally, when one's soul was ripped out of their body, there would be subtle signs left etched into the flesh of the deceased, and these could be used to infer the method of extraction used. Neither the Aradia nor Veyers showed such traces, though, it was as if they were merely flesh puppets that had never held any life to begin with. They had expected such a result, but it was nice to have things confirmed so clearly. After examining Veyers' body, they moved on to Jarnik. Zorian had expected the young lawyer to be absolutely livid at them, but the way they just barged into his home and brutally subdued him must have clued him into the fact they weren't here on behalf of regular law enforcement. Or maybe it was their age. Zorian sometimes forgot to account for that little detail, as he felt pretty old these days, but he and Zack still looked like teenagers. Jornik was thus a lot more subdued this time around, too terrified about what they wanted to do with him to put up much of a resistance. Sadly, interrogating him with the aid of truth potions and mind magic yielded very little of note. Everything was mostly as Jornik had said in the previous restart, except that Veyers was also something of an informant for the young lawyer in addition to being a friend. He basically reported anything interesting that occurred in his house to Jornik, who then forwarded the information to the cult of the World Dragon. Thus, Veyers was something of an unwitting low-level spy for the cult. Finally, Zack and Zorian sat down one day to discuss their findings and what they meant regarding the identity of Red Robe. So, Zack began, "We've confirmed that Veyers is either Red Robe or connected to him in some fashion. His body is clearly just a meat puppet that never held a soul to begin with, just like the bodies of your Iranian friends beneath the city. Either he was somehow connected to Red Robe and the man decided to use Salkil on him, or he is Red Robe and this is what happens to a controller's body when they leave the time loop. Is that about right?" "It is," Zorian confirmed. Additionally, the fact Red Robe saw fit to delete your memories of Veyers reinforces his importance. We haven't been able to find anyone else whose entire presence had been scoured from your mind, so whatever link he has to Red Robe isn't small. He also has a reason to be bitter at the city and a link to the invasion, however tenuous," Zack added. "Yeah, he could totally be Red Robe. Even his height and build matches what I remember of him when he attacked me at the start of that one restart." "Sadly, that is not real proof of anything," Zorian said, shaking his head. "At the level of skill we are working at, that sort of thing is trivially easy to fake. All it takes is a quick transformation spell and you could radically change your height and build. Well, he did attack me at the very start of the restart when he was undoubtedly in a hurry and didn't have much time to make detailed preparations. Maybe it slipped his mind? You have a better memory than I do and you saw him up close. How does the Red Robe in your mind compare to theirs?" Zorian considered it carefully. After a while he decided that Zack was right. Veyers did have the appropriate height and build to be the Red Robe in his memories. "It is as you say," Zorian said slowly. "He does kind of fit under that robe. But really, in order to get to the bottom of this, we need to find out what happens when a controller leaves the time loop. This should tell us whether Veyers is just a Salkil victim or the very mastermind we are looking for. And how are we supposed to do that?" Zack complained. "That stupid guardian of the threshold thing refuses to entertain hypotheticals like that. We already asked it what happens in this scenario, remember? It simply insisted that no such thing could transpire. Besides, we still don't know what method Red Robe used to leave. If he's a later addition to the time loop like you assume he is, he couldn't have used the normal method to do so. He would have run into the problem of his original already having a soul, which should have led to the Guardian refusing to cooperate. Depending on what method Red Robe used to leave the time loop, the answer to the question of what would happen to his body might radically change." "Not necessarily," Zorian said. "One thing that always stuck with me about Red Robe is that he honestly seemed concerned about the possibility of there being a large number of other time travelers involved in the time loop. That means that he knew of a very easy and reliable way of inducing people in the time loop and thought it was entirely plausible that someone was using it on a mass scale. He did seem quite certain that there were a lot of other time travelers lurking around," Zack said, frowning. "My memory of that time is not the best, but that did appear to be the main thing he sought answers about when he probed my mind that night." "Right," Zorian said. "And this method couldn't have been the same as what I went through, because what happened to me is highly dangerous to the marker donor and probably doesn't give consistent results. It also couldn't have been something that is hard to set up, or else Red Robe wouldn't have accepted it happening so readily and on such a large scale." "So what is it then?" Zack asked impatiently. "I'm guessing you have some sort of answer, or else you wouldn't be mentioning it. Don't try to reenact those cheap detective novels with me, please. I always found the long reveals in those books to be really annoying." "Fine, I'll be blunt," Zorian sighed. Killjoy. I think Red Robe was simply using a modified temporary marker to persist in the time loop. Sure, they are supposed to last only 6 months, but that's probably just an extra restriction rather than something inherent in the marker itself. And my own marker demonstrates quite clearly that these markers can be damaged. Perhaps selectively damaged, allowing people to remove some of the functions. There have to be some protections against that, Zack frowned. I doubt that the makers of the system would just allow people to tinker with their work like that. Possibly, Zorian conceded. Not having seen any temporary marker yet, I can offer little except baseless speculation. But still, this seems to me like the most likely and straightforward way for Red Robe to enter the time loop. Zack considered his words for a while before giving it a careless shrug and focusing his attention back to Zorian. Well. Alright, Zack shrugged. Let's assume you're right. So what? How does that relate to what we were talking about? Well, the temporary markers are supposed to be temporary, Zorian said. There is probably a clear course of action meant to be done when they run out and the person they were supporting disappears. And this course of action will probably be performed even if the person disappears prematurely through some other method. Oh. Zack said, slapping himself in the forehead. Of course. So if Red Robe entered the time loop through a selectively damaged temporary marker, all we have to do to find out what would happen after he leaves is place a temporary marker on someone and see what happens after it runs out. Exactly, Zorian nodded. A brief silence descended on the scene. You know, Zack began after a while, I'm pretty sure we already know the answer to that question. It probably just recreates a person from its usual template, as if they were never a temporary looper to begin with. I have no proof of this, but it intuitively makes sense to me. You are probably correct, Zorian nodded. I also have no proof, but it is consistent with the intent of the time loop as the training simulation to set things up in that fashion. Which would mean that Veyers isn't Red Robe, Zack continued with that line of thought. Red Robe should have ended up as a normal person with no memory of his time-looping self, not a soulless corpse. If he really did enter the time loop via a modified temporary marker, that is probably the case, Zorian nodded. Zack hummed thoughtfully, tapping his fingers against his chin. So let's assume for a moment that Veyers is just a broken link. I still think he is the most likely candidate for Red Robe, but whatever, your theory does sound rather plausible. Who is Veyers linked to? Jornik. Is he Red Robe? He could be, I guess, Zorian said uncertainly. I mean, I see no real evidence for that, and the man is not very impressive. We weren't very impressive before the time loop happened to us, either, Zack pointed out. True, Zorian said. I'm not saying it's impossible for Jornik to be Red Robe, just that I see no real evidence for the idea. Did Veyers have any other friends and associates other than Jornik? Zack asked. I think he did, but Jornik did not know who these people were, Zorian said. Veyers didn't like to talk about his personal life and Jornik didn't pry into it too much. The fact that Veyers chose to take shelter in Jornik's place might be artificially skewing our perception of how close they were. They weren't really that close. Jornik was actually quite surprised when Veyers came knocking on his door with a plea to let him stay for a while, and even contemplated refusing. They discussed things for another hour or so before deciding to shelve the discussion for now. They would be interrogating Jornik in more detail in upcoming days, which would hopefully shed more light on the issue. They also intended to use pieces of Veyers' body as divination tools to try and track his movement while he was alive. They would have to do this very, very carefully though, lest they get tracked down themselves by the Boranova House investigators. Eventually the two of them retired into one of the quieter, less frequented taverns on the outskirts of the city and sat down to have a drink and talk about less serious topics. The waitress gave Zorian a really weird look when he ordered fruit juice instead of anything alcoholic and Zack mocked him for it, but Zorian wasn't really bothered about that. Instead he decided to make use of this opportunity to complain about the family drama that Damon forced him to participate in near the end of the previous restart. Oh man, your family is such a train wreck, Zack laughed. It's not even funny, except it kind of is. Though I have to admit, I kind of get the urge to defend Fortov when you explain his situation like that. I mean, I understand why you feel the way you do, but us fuck-ups needs to look out for each other, you know? What do you— oh yeah, you were kind of doing badly in the academy yourself, weren't you? Zorian suddenly realized. He winced. Sorry. I wasn't thinking. No, it's fine, Zack said, shaking his head. I'm not insulted. Much like Fortov, I too had excuses for my poor performance. But I understand now that they were just that, excuses. Perhaps Fortov will eventually learn his lesson as well, eh? Perhaps, Zorian agreed diplomatically. Zack responded by taking a deep sip out of his beer keg and then leaned back in his chair in contentment. You know, every time I think about what my future would have been like if I never got pulled into this time loop thing, I get both furious and horrified, Zack said, staring at the ceiling of the tavern with unfocused eyes. It's been so long, but I remember what it was like so very vividly. How I lived in an empty, half-abandoned house, constantly hearing about how I was expected to rebuild my entire house from scratch and feeling utterly lost as to how I can accomplish it. How I eventually decided it was a hopeless task and began to coast by on the least amount of effort I could get away with and just tried to keep myself happy. But hey, it was fine. I had plenty of money. I mean, that was why Tizen fired all the servants and sold off all our properties, right? So it doesn't matter if I don't do too well at the academy and have no real professional skills. Everything will work out. Just fine. Zack suddenly finished off his beer keg and then slammed it violently onto the cheap wooden table. The tavern workers all turned towards them, and for a moment Zorian thought he would be thrown out of a building for the second time in 2 restarts, but in the end they just shook their heads slightly and went about their work. Evidently this was not a rare occurrence around here. I'm getting angry again, Zack explained unnecessarily. I shouldn't be talking about this while drinking. Zorian scratched his cheek awkwardly, not sure how to respond to that. He was really regretting starting the topic about Fortov now. You know what the problem with teaming up with you is? Zack asked him suddenly, staring intently into his eyes. He didn't wait for his answer. I can't start a restart by beating Tizen into a bloody pulp anymore. I used to do that every once in a while to work out my frustrations. Zorian remembered that. It used to occur quite frequently, leading up to a lot of speculation about Zack and his reasons for doing that. It's probably for the best you stop doing that, Zorian told him. You might develop unhealthy habits and end up becoming a fugitive for no good reason once we're out of the time loop. That would be a pretty sad way for all this to end, no? I guess, Zack said. But it was so satisfying. Zack eyed his keg for a couple of seconds, as if considering if he should get himself another, before sighing and pushing it to the side. Good. He'd rather not deal with a drunk Zack right now. What do you intend to do about Tizen, anyway? Zorian asked. When we get out of the time loop, I mean. What else? I'm going to sue him into oblivion, Zack said. He may be powerful and well-connected, but I still have some friends in high places, and he was pretty brazen in his actions. He broke the law when he robbed me of my inheritance, and I'll do my best to make him pay for it through official channels. If that doesn't work, well, I hope it doesn't get to that. I see, Zorian said. I didn't see you do any research on the topic thus far. I've already done all the preparations a long time ago, Zack said. I have all the evidence I need. I know how to blindside him when putting things into motion, and I can afford to hire the best damn lawyers in the country to represent me. There is nothing more that can be done within the confines of the restart. These kind of legal cases take years of legal wrangling, not weeks. Still, a strong start does count for a lot, and all the lawyers I spoke with tell me I have a good chance of winning. That's good, Zorian nodded slowly. Though I have a suspicion Tizen and his faction won't limit themselves to mere legal wrangling in their attempts to deal with you. I know, Zack grinned. But you know me. I don't shy away from danger. Let them come. It will just give me a stronger case when it turns up what they've been up to. Anything I can do to help? Zorian asked. Probably not, actually, Zack said, shaking his head. "This is mostly a job for lawyers, not for the likes of us. Once I put things into motion, I just need to keep the money flowing and ward off any assassination attempts and the like. But we'll see. Rest assured I will not be too shy to ask for help from my fellow time traveler." The conversation wound down after that, and they each went their separate ways for the day. The upcoming days were going to be somewhat busy ones, involving a great deal of preparations and planning. It was time to visit Silver Lake again. And this time they planned to seriously try and convince her that the time loop is real. When Zack and Zorian showed at Silver Lake's hidden base, they came carrying the Grey Hunter's egg sac and the ancient giant salamander that Silver Lake was looking for. The eggs were acquired in the exact same way they had been in the previous restart. As for the salamander, they just went to the same place Zorian had found it in the past and then started their search from there. Eventually, after 2 whole days of searching up and down the river and examining nearby hiding places, they found the giant salamander buried in the mud of one of the flooded caverns, almost undetectable if one didn't know what to look for. Without an appropriate starting point, it would have taken them forever to track it down. But no matter, the point was that they had both of the ingredients that Silver Lake wanted so badly for her youth potion, and Zorian had created the keystone that Silver Lake had shown him how to make in the previous restart. They also loaded up a bunch of combat golems into the portable palace orb, ready to be taken out at a moment's notice, just in case Silver Lake reacted badly to their approach. Something that was entirely possible, but unavoidable. They didn't have the time to take things slowly anymore. "I'm ready," Zack said, twirling a combat staff in his fingers to pass the time. "Go ahead and ring the bell." Zorian nodded and activated the keystone in his hands. Nothing visible happened, but Zorian was sure he had performed the action correctly. Now they could only wait. They had to wait a surprisingly long time, longer than they had to the last time they had come here. Zorian suspected this was because Silver Lake was studying them from inside before deciding to come out, and this time they had come more heavily armed and visibly dangerous. Eventually, however, she decided to greet them anyway. The fact that Zack had gotten bored at some point and started building a giant statue of himself via alteration spells right outside her home might have motivated her to hurry up. "How the hell did you activate that old piece of junk?" she immediately demanded, squinting at each of them suspiciously. "I never gave anyone a matching keystone. Hell, I never even made any matching keystones." "Suspicious. Very, very suspicious. Who are you two?" "To answer your last question, I am Zack Nevada and this is Zorian Kaczynski. We are but humble academy students coming here to pay our respects to a living legend," Zack flattered shamelessly. Silver Lake snorted derisively at him, saying nothing. "And also to arrange for a trade, I guess. Or should I say, renegotiate our existing one? After all, this is the second time we're meeting like this." "I don't think so," Silver Lake said curiously. "I don't remember you. I may be old, but I'm pretty sure I'd never forget a couple of brats as brazen as you two. I mean, I kind of like that kind of attitude, but only when it's directed at other people." "That's just because your memory of our meeting has been wiped clean from your mind," Zorian said in a carefree manner. "Nothing to worry about. Anyway, here is a gift." Zorian reached into his backpack and withdrew a bottle of brandy and a box of sweets from it, which he then handed to a surprised Silver Lake. She made no move to claim them, looking at both objects like they were poisonous vipers. "A gift?" she asked emotionlessly. "It is customary to bring gifts when visiting someone," Zorian said sagely. "It's an important tradition." Silver Lake made a sour face at that explanation. She spent a few more seconds scrutinizing the two objects before finally deciding they were probably harmless. She took them both from his hands and immediately stuffed them into one of her jacket pockets. Even though the heavy bottle and the large box of sweets shouldn't have possibly been able to fit into the tiny jacket pocket, they somehow did. What a casual use of pocket dimension creation. Zorian couldn't help but feel a little jealous. He wouldn't be able to duplicate that feat, and in fact didn't even know how to go about achieving it. He could only extend the space of rigid containers right now, and had no idea how to use something as flexible as a pocket as a base for a pocket dimension. He knew it was unreasonable to expect to be as good as Silver Lake after only a month of instruction, but this was a pretty stark reminder of how far he had to go to match the old witch's expertise in that regard. Silver Lake grinned at him in triumph, savoring this little victory for all it was worth. "Let's back up a bit, shall we?" she asked, a little more confident this time. "You said something about my memory being wiped." "Yes," Zack nodded. "You see, about a month ago we came to you with a certain offer." And Zack started giving Silver Lake the summarized version of what happened in the previous restart, though they took pains to temporarily omit any mention of the time loop itself. They figured it would immediately make Silver Lake disbelieve anything else they had to say if they started with that. Instead they just narrated the general terms of their deal and the way she had instructed them in the art of pocket dimension creation and occasionally sent them on random errands. And they used plenty of props in their explanation. When they spoke of how they offered the previous version of Silver Lake Grey Hunter's eggs, they took the eggs they obtained in this restart out of the portable palace orb and showed them to her. When they spoke of how Silver Lake told them she also needed an ancient giant salamander to complete her youth potion, they took out the living salamander they captured and showed it off as well. Silver Lake's eyes shone brightly when she saw the two alchemical ingredients she wanted the most laid out in front of her, but she remained silent and motionless as she listened to their story in a rapt manner. When it came time to move the story into Silver Lake's home dimension, though, her expression fell and turned grave. This was because Zorian started using illusionary scenes from his memory to illustrate his points. Normally these kinds of illusory images weren't worth much as a proof. After all, nothing stopped the illusionist from fabricating things, and people's memories tended to be kind of fuzzy in even the best of cases. However, Zorian had the ability to remember a scene down to the tiniest detail, and it wasn't like one could randomly invent a detailed layout of Silver Lake's dimension and be correct. He could replicate the image of her favorite cauldron down to the tiniest scratch and replicate the exact number of dried onions and mushrooms hanging from the hooks on her wall. It was a pretty damning proof that he had at least been there at some point, even if he wasn't telling the truth about anything else, and Silver Lake clearly knew it. "Stop, stop," she suddenly told him, waving her hand in a forceful manner. She looked honestly shaken at the sight of these images. I need to check something." Zack and Zorian stood by the side while Silver Lake started casting one diagnostic spell after another on herself. Occasionally she would stop and mutter to herself in some alien Kusky tongue that neither Zack nor Zorian had ever encountered, before shaking her head and continuing with her self-diagnostics. After that she started examining the entrance to her dimension before wordlessly disappearing inside. Zack and Zorian still waited patiently, not saying anything. She returned 20 minutes later, looking more disturbed than ever. "It doesn't make sense," she loudly proclaimed. "None of this makes sense. My memory is fine. It hasn't been tampered with. I know it hasn't, because there are always traces left when one does so, and my mind doesn't have any. But you've clearly been inside my home long enough to dig up that old stone and puzzle out a matching keystone for it. Long enough to memorize every corner of it down to the smallest detail. Except there is no trace of illegal entry, not even the faintest whiff of it, and there is no way in all the hells and all the heavens I'd ever forget letting someone like you inside. And your story. What a bunch of rubbish. You say you sold me Grey Hunter's eggs a whole month ago, yet I see no evidence I've ever processed them. And now you come here with a new sack of Grey Hunter's eggs, as if those can be acquired just by going into your neighborhood store or something. Who are you people and what is happening here?" She punctuated her statement by making a sweeping hand gesture, causing two huge, hulking humanoids of Earth to suddenly coalesce out of the soil around them. Earth elementals, and not minor ones either. However, "Should we?" Zack mouthed. Zorian quietly nodded and made a sweeping gesture of his own, though his one was mostly for show, not because he actually needed to make it. Then again, maybe it was the same for Silver Lake. In any case, he made use of the time needed to make the gesture to reach out into the ever-useful orb, causing a bunch of equally huge and hulking war golems to pop into existence next to them. "We don't want to fight," Zorian said. "But if you really insist on it, I guarantee you it won't end in your favor." Rather than answer him, Silver Lake stomped her foot on the ground, causing a set of heavy, potent wards to radiate out of the entrance to her pocket dimensions. The warding scheme quickly enclosed the entire area, shutting down their teleportation, filling the area with fog, inhibiting their shaping skills, disturbing their souls. Even as Silver Lake was making her move, though, Zorian was doing the same. He quickly reached into his backpack again and retrieved from it a truncated pyramid made out of glittering blue stone. He threw it in front of him, and it promptly righted itself in the air and began to hover there, golden lines and glyphs suddenly appearing on its surface. In a blink of an eye, it had enclosed Zack, Zorian and their war golems under a dome of yellow light. Silver Lake's wards crashed into the dome, and were immediately halted in their tracks. The old witch was way better than Zorian in a number of fields, but her skill at setting up wards wasn't one of them. Not to mention that wards were always more effective as a means of defense than they were as an offensive tool. There was a tense silence as the two sides stared at each other from behind their respective barriers. After about a minute of this, Silver Lake suddenly sighed and commanded the Earth Elementals to merge back into the Earth and the wards to retreat back into her pocket dimension. After a second of hesitation, Zack and Zorian similarly put away their own defenses. "Well," Silver Lake said, sounding surprisingly chirpy and relaxed. She chuckled at their wary postures and serious faces. "I really suffered a loss this time, didn't I? I guess this is what I get for trying to escalate things into combat. I was never that much of a fighter, truth be told. I don't suppose we could all forget this ever happened, huh?" "Sure, let's," Zack said, giving her a friendly grin. "It's probably for the best if this never happens again, though. I only ever give people 2 chances." "Oh," Silver Lake said, cocking her head sideways like a curious bird. "Oh, I see. Everything I've been met with thus far is your friend's work, but he isn't actually the combat specialist. You are. And you never even made a move thus far." She shook her head, speaking to herself self-depreciatingly. "Silly old girl, making such blunders at your age. It's just as they say, you learn all your life and still die a fool. Though there should hopefully be no dying for me just yet." "In any case," said Zorian, coughing into his fist to attract her attention, "I believe I have an answer for the concerns you expressed just before this unpleasantness. You were wondering how this was all possible, yes?" "Yes," she bluntly confirmed. "I'm very curious as to how this could happen." "It's like this," said Zorian, creating another illusory scene, this one depicting the planet they lived on, spinning placidly in the air. "There is an artifact from the Age of Gods that can take our entire world, take a snapshot of every single thing in existence and create a flawless copy of it in a giant pocket dimension." Surprisingly, after Zorian had gotten about halfway into the story, Silver Lake suddenly started to ask a series of rapid-fire questions about the Sovereign Gate, the Guardian of the Threshold, the exact mechanics of the time loop itself, and so on. "All right, you can stop now," she eventually said, tapping her leg with her bony fingers. "I think I know what's going on now." "Well, somewhat. And if I'm right, then there is a very easy way to check if you're telling the truth or not." Zack and Zorian perked up at her words. "Oh?" Zack asked excitedly. Silver Lake grinned, obviously enjoying the fact that she knew something they didn't. Or at least thought she did. Zorian wasn't going to get excited before he heard what she actually had to say. For all he knew, she was just trying to patch up her wounded pride. "Tell me," she said, "have you two ever heard about the primordials?" Toad continued,